At the pinnacle of his power, a man risks losing control. The world is not kind, so its kings become cruel. Murder is never mercy, it's never noble, and it's never redeemable. To the maniac, murder is an art form.
What is happening? For God's sake, answer.
Welcome back to Visited by Voices Live. Just me tonight. So no other chatterbox to keep you entertained. It's just all about me tonight. So I want to say hello to everyone that's out there in the chat. I was really heartwarmed to see that after changing the time and going on with very little warning that there's at least 14 of you that are joining me just at the outset. So thank you, Al. Thank you, Crystal Lake Counselor 77, Joe Bob Tarhill. Thank you, Gibbs. Thank you, Darren Burrows. And thank you, James Frost. And whoever else is out there but not saying hello, please say hello when you get here. This is a community, so your voice is valuable to me. Can everyone hear me clearly? And hello, Scotty. So, Jacob, are you sure that those are my hands? I mean, it's a safe bet because, you know, both Martino and Argento used themselves as the killer's hands. But so one thing I wanted to discuss just briefly, and then we'll get to just a kind of free-form conversation with y'all, is, and I live far too far north to use a word like y'all, but I just did, is I don't know if you saw the news today, but some Samsung Blu-ray and 4K UHD players simply stopped working today, all over the world. Not from a specific region or a specific country. Just wouldn't play discs, or if they did, they'd stop and restart the discs a few times and then turn off. And it seems that there's a flaw in the programming. But the problem is they're no longer supporting these machines. As most of you know, last year Samsung exited the Blu-ray, DVD, and UHD market for players. They're no longer producing new players and they're no longer supporting them. So while it looks like they are putting people on trying to solve the problems, and in some areas people are saying that they unplugged the players, plugged them back in after a considerable time being unplugged, and they seem to be back in business. It's kind of a scary thing because we talk about the death of physical media. I never considered the hardware. I was just thought about the cessation of creating the new discs. But I think we've been overlooking an obvious problem. Now, this won't be true so much of DVD players because that was a stagnant technology. It was kind of the same thing, you know, from its beginning to now. It's been the same technology with very little deviation. But Blu-ray has been a dynamic form. It's changed a lot. And UHD, I don't know if any of you have bought a player, but the first thing you got the player out of the box and plugged it in. It needed to update its firmware like immediately. And if those updates stop coming, that may put us in a position. Now, of course, if you have a later player after all the discs stop being made, it's not probably going to be that big a deal because it should play everything, you would think. But if you're like me and you have a player that's a few years old, this might be a new wrinkle to think about in the continuing debate over the future of physical media. Is what is the role then of the manufacturers to support the machines? And can we as a community find programmers out there that could keep us in business? Now, certainly after they stop making discs entirely, there won't be a need for updates, is the concept. But there'll be a lot of players on the market that simply will be paperweights. So it's worth keeping an eye on. I'm going to be watching this news story as it unfolds, but it's a little bit scary. So, I will say that this week I did pick up a piece of physical media for a very good price. I got the Synapse version release of the original Satan's Slave. Some of you know that last year there was a remake that came out of this. This is a classic Indonesian horror film. And I've loved this film for decades. I owned it at first without subtitles, and it really didn't matter. It's such a creepy, evocative film. It's definitely worth picking up if you like that late 70s aesthetic, but also foreign. It's a very, very interesting looking film. Some people say it's boring, but it's not. It's just a slow burn, and you have to be down for that. I think of myself as a guy who likes both, the gutter thrills of an exploitation film, but I also like the slow burn, intelligent horror film in equal measure. So this I never thought would get a nice release like this. So I was overjoyed. You will see that it is someone sold a promo copy. That cutout mark over the barcode is a dead giveaway that it was not meant to be sold on the aftermarket. But if someone ended up with it as a review copy or simply ended up with it and didn't want it, they are willing to sell them cheap because, it's found money. So if you haven't seen Satan's Slave, by the way, the original, I recommend doing it. It's not hard to find. It was on YouTube in its entirety, looking not great. It's not that transfer, that's for sure. But I think it's well worth your time. And, rather than watch Friday the 13th Part 3 for the, 75th time, just give it a try. It's definitely worth it. I think a lot of you will get a lot of enjoyment out of it. So let's see what people are talking about out in the chat. We got a lot of hello. Chris likes Counselor 77. Whenever you want to hit up the Halloween questions, I'm good with it. And it's heartwarming to see you asking Halloween 78 questions because, it seems like all we talk about is 2018 or the Rob Zombie films or Resurrection. For some reason, the bad films tend to be the ones people want to hear my position on. So I come off as sounding negative, but it's what people keep asking me to talk about. Gibbs says, pulling knobs on the floor of their toxic metropolis. Indeed, sir. Darren Burrows says hello. Crystal Counselor 77 says hello. Al from Russia, from Suspiria, from Philadelphia says, just watched Graduation Day. And Crystal Counselor 77 answers that he loves Graduation Day's opening song, the ending too. Yeah, Graduation Day is one of those films that all the elements are there. I don't love it, but all the elements are there, and it feels like it should be one of those top-tier slashers of the period, but it doesn't quite rise there. But if you love slasher films, it's definitely something worth revisiting every few years, in my opinion. It's not the most well-written film ever. Its acting leaves something to be desired, but you know what? If you are a fan of horror films, those are not top of the checklist for you. They're just not. It's great when you get something like Hereditary, but how often do we get something like Hereditary or The Exorcist or Jaws? It's not. If it was our main diet, it was good writing and good acting, we would starve in the genre most years because it's not about that. Jess Graham says hello. Let's see. Borderline 11 says, just got here looking forward to some good chatter tonight. Well, we're going to chatter. We'll try and make it good. We'll see what we can do, sir. Jacob McCall says, Martino did too. Shouldn't surprise me. So the thing about Sergio Martino's productions were very interesting because in Italy at the time that he was working, which was late 60s through the 70s, the industry was doing well, but it was doing well because of exports. It wasn't really a domestic marketplace that was really feeding the economy of film, right? Yeah, if you couldn't sell it to America and to England and to India, you were in trouble. You were in serious trouble with your film. So what happened is these productions were trying to cut as many corners as they could. And Argento has said in interviews that he liked having the control, and he was so specific about how he wanted the hands on screen. Martino doesn't make any illusions. He said, I wasn't hiring someone to just do that. And we weren't going to pay a professional actor to be there to do something that anyone could do. So, yeah, Martino tended to be not only the gloved killers, he tended to be the, feet that walked by, the blurry guy in the back of a scene. I read once that he's in All the Colors of the Dark 16 times, if you're paying attention. And there's not a lot of characters in that movie, really. So it's kind of shocking. It's not like a film filled with crowd scenes or busy intersection, crossing guard moments. So it was all about money for Martino. And Martino did incredible work. I want to say this right now. I say it all the time to my close friends, but when people talk about Argento and Fulci, first of all, they need to add Bava in there because it's just insane not to talk Bava, but Martino needs to be included. I mean, his films, especially in the Giallos, were every bit as good as anything Argento produced. I'll stand on that. I think Argento surpasses him with his supernatural fantasies like Suspiria. But for the Giallo, oh man, I'd be hard pressed to not say his films are the equal. Jess Graham says out to Al Suspiria, cool to see you on screen at the Piz show the other night. Yeah, that was a really fun time. Nothing like watching 3 hours fly by in your life. And it felt good. It felt really good to talk to all you guys. And that's what I'm talking about too. It's like, this has got to be about us. It can't be about just reporting, hey, this new movie's coming out or this person just got signed. Who cares? That stuff can fill up a few minutes. It's the conversations between us that matter. Jess and Al both are talking whiskey. Let's see. All right. James Frost says, Lauren, have you read every single Del Abyss release? Just curious, could you give your top favorites of the line? I can. I don't have a prepared list, so this would be an off the top of my list. I have not read everything that Del Abyss released. By the end of the line, they were releasing a lot of things that didn't fit really into the concept of the early years. So it wasn't all progressive horror. It wasn't all next level stuff. They ended up even producing like vampire novels and things to try and keep the line alive. But I'm not gonna put these in order, but certainly Prototype by Brian Hodge, Cypher by Kathy Koja. I would probably say Bereavements by, I believe, Daniel Mertz. There's a Gary Razor title in there. I'm trying to think of the title of it offhand. And I mean, listen, if you're going to talk top five, I'd have to throw Nightlife by Brian Hodge in there as well. Simply because those two novels, Prototype and Nightlife, are really the novels that just blew my mind about where I thought the horror industry was going. I thought it was going to this place where news stories, bold outlines, unpredictable choices, not so much subverting expectations, but removing expectations and just going off into the winterlands, And the same thing with Cypher, definitely. There was a time for the promise of a future. And it didn't end up coming true because the line didn't sell well enough. But I would also suggest, by the way, to anyone, it's not Del Abyss, but Thomas Monteleone's Borderlands series are collections of short stories. And it is a cross-section of everything that was really great coming out in horror during that time period. And just an amazing amount of talent. Every story hits. Tom Monteleone has done a lot of good for the horror community. He's done a lot of seminars to teach writing to people who are actually interested in making it in the business. He's been a writing coach for people. I'm not a classroom guy, so that's not a plug for someone I've worked with, but he's definitely an important figure. Let's see. Jess Graham says, I always like talking about any of the original series of Nightmare on Elm Street, Friday the 13th, Halloween, Texas Chainsaw, etc. Yeah, so do I. As much as I do like a lot of sequels, and I used to love the idea of sequels before it became what it is now, because, in the late 80s, until like 89, you'd get maybe 2 or 3 horror sequels a year. It wasn't like there was this big glut of them. And so it was exciting to see those stories continued, even the long running ones. But now everything just continues until we're just blue in the face with it. I'm just tired. I'm just tired of the same stuff. And that's not to say someone couldn't make something brilliant, but my patience has kind of run out and my expectations are on the floor. So Jacob McCullough says, do you think they'll ever do a video on Nightmare 5? Do you think you'll ever do a video on Nightmare 5? As far as bad sequels go, it has a lot worth talking about. I still look to Shaw's script this way. I have to be honest about the Nightmare series. I'll answer your question directly, but Nightmare on Elm Street is my least favorite of the long-running horror franchises for a lot of reasons. The first film really affected me, and I saw the first and second film on the same night, so I had a really good reaction to the second film at that time because I kind of saw them back to back, literally tape after tape, right? But in hindsight, the second film's a big step down from the first, and then everything else in the series I think is pretty awful, to be completely honest with you. I don't like what the Freddy character did to the horror business. Whereas now every franchise needed its talking, joking, smiling, Jim Carrey-esque, before Jim Carrey, serial killer. To me, it was like an infantilization of the slasher film. And now everything had to be funny. And I have problems with humor, as many of you know. I have certain empathy problems that I don't laugh where other people laugh. I have a very dark sense of humor. I do have a sense of humor, but like goofy stuff usually does not affect me at all. And, most of those Nightmare on Elm Street films' humor is pretty grotesquely like silly and stupid. And there's an audience for that. I'm not putting you down if you like any of that stuff. It's just not me. So I think Nightmare 5 is interesting, not just because David J. Shaw, but because it really did want to go dark and dark and uncomfortable in a lot of the same ways that the remake did, except I think it's a better film than the remake because it wasn't tied to trying to remake anything. It was just trying to continue the story and make it dark again. But it made the instances of humor and goofiness, even more obvious. So although there's less of it, it hurts a little bit more. But honestly, I don't think there's a lot to talk about with the Nightmare on Elm Street films, except maybe the original and maybe the second film because of the subtext. But that's been so explored at this point. The series is basically just a hey, ain't it clever series of vignettes, And the answer is, by the way, no. In general, they're not clever. But so I'm not a Nightmare fan. I don't see myself doing the whole series. I think, like Halloween, which I want to do this October. I want to do the entire series as an autopsy series. It's a big investment, and there's films that I simply feel like I'll trudge through doing it. So that's what makes me really cautious about doing entire franchises, even though I've already done Friday the 13th, The Exorcist, and Texas Chainsaw Massacre. So what Alice asks, what horror movies everyone watching later? I don't know that I'm going to watch a movie after this, but you guys certainly should chime in and let them know. Jacob McCall says, Bob is the best in my opinion, a much more consistent filmmaker than Argento. Until the end, yes. And certainly Wild Dogs is the right way to cap a career. I would say that those early Bava films, even outside the genre, are always really, really worth watching and really interesting. Danger Diabolique, which is not a horror film. It's a spy parody, comic book adaptation, psychedelic acid trip, is one of the most fun films you could ever watch. So, I mean, he was very versatile. He was very good. And when he did horror, he did horror. So if you watch Black Sunday is, to my mind, if you were to, this isn't saying it's my favorite film, although it's in my top 15. If you were to tell me you have to pick one film to encapsulate what the horror movie is, what it is, I would choose Black Sunday, because You see, the thing is, you might want to choose something like Friday the 13th or Halloween, but they only represent a small corner of the genre. Black Sunday, when you watch it, is so much a horror film. Every frame just feels like horror. And I think that's a beautiful, beautiful thing. If you haven't seen the movie, you need to do it because it's not the kind of classic that you're going to be bored with. I promise you, there's nothing boring about the film. And as far as consistency, I've said this before, but I think it's important for artists to leave the stage when they're done and they need to know they're done. I love Argento, but I think his career would have been served better if he had stopped making films after Stendhal syndrome, which I like a lot as a film, by the way. We can get into that debate if someone really wants to, but I think Stendhal has all the elements of classic Argento. It was just made it a more challenging time in his career. But imagine what we would talk about him as a director had he not had all those later films. And I'm not even talking Dracula. I'm talking things like Nazohano, which is known as Sleepless in America. I think we'd be thinking of him as probably the best that had ever been. Because even though his work wavers somewhat, it doesn't waver enough to take his high points down. James Frost says, Al, all I really want to watch is the original My Bloody Valentine, but Scream Factory is taking forever to ship them, the one that I've ordered from them. So I didn't buy that disc. I don't do a lot of pre-orders, but here it's weird. I like My Bloody Valentine. I have it on DVD, and that is fireworks. I'm completely okay with that. Like, that's good enough for me. It's a good slasher film. It really is. But I think there's been an attempt in recent years to kind of elevate My Bloody Valentine to the very top of the heap. And for my money, something like Hell Night, which I just did a video on, is far more interesting of a film than My Bloody Valentine. Your mileage will vary. Darren Burrow says, I love Martino. I think some of Umberto Lenzi's Giallo films are pretty underrated as well. They are. Lenzi's films tend to be more of sex dramas with violence sprinkled in. But I think listen, if Lenzi had never made his jungle movies, we'd think of him differently too. And that's not taking anything away from him because he's going to be best remembered for his cannibal films. We're not focused. There we go. Alice says, James, give them a call. Maybe it's delayed due to COVID-19 or just slow email, or call them and check what's up. I'll go a step further. Call them and just have them ship another disc out because that's what they'll do. Because honestly, right now what I'm discovering is that the all postage, especially international, is a mess. But then on top of that, what you have is just no one's watching the store, really. I mean, it's like something goes missing, no one's going to track it down. So I would just call them, ask them, say, I've not received this. If this is lost in the mail, I'd appreciate another copy being sent. They probably just will. James Frost says, Lauren, what do you think of Scott Smith's The Ruins? So we're talking about the novel, not the film made from it. Although it's a decent adaptation. It's just the material it's not a film I would have it's not a book I would have adapted to a film. I think it works better on the page. So Smith wanted to write a novel about basically unlikable characters, and that's a little bit of it's a little bit of a pill for some people to swallow. I liked it, and I like that it's a fairly economic novel. It doesn't, you read it in a couple sittings. It's a tops 4 sittings book, really. I like it. I think Scott Smith is an insanely talented guy who takes his time writing, and he carefully constructs his work. I would say that it's probably something I would have appreciated them not making into a film, though, because while they accurately represent the story, that story seems more substantial on the page than it does on the screen. Jess says, I totally get about getting tired of the same stuff. Uh, you know what my biggest problem is that people think this means I just want all this stuff to just leave, you know, and I would never trade out all these great titles that I love, but I just want new titles I feel as passionate about, and I don't see myself getting that from, what's being released right now. In general, like there's films like Hellfest and Game Over. There's that even this year's Psycho or this year's Boot Part One, The Haunted Ship, which I am very passionate about, and I think there's great films. The Lodge, I think quite a lot about. So it's not like it's all doom and gloom, but you'll notice the common denominator between all those films I mentioned is that they're original stories. Now, Boot Part One is a remake, but it doesn't have any semblance to the original film called Boot. So it's usually just the title. So I think I'm just drawn to news stories because I've been watching these same stories for 35, 40 years. I'm just can we do something new? I can't get excited when they announce Scream 5. I just can't. Not because I don't like the Scream series, although I don't have any love for the Scream series, but because it's like, oh, I bet it'll be a guy in a white mask holding a knife again. There we are. Ooh. Rush's Ashes. Hello, sir. I didn't say hello to you yet. He says, the first Nightmare film was brilliant. I only ever saw that one as a kid. My dad kept me from the others till I bought myself them on DVD. I'm glad he did. I grew up thinking Freddy was brutal. Well, your dad had your best interests at heart, clearly. The first film is a great film. The first film it suffers a little bit because the special effects were designed to be they were designed for kind of cheap theater viewings. They weren't really designed for today's high def world. And so there's a lot of moments now that I look at and I go, ooh, as far as the special effects. I think the film is really lucky, though, because I think the acting is way better than it needed to be in that film. And a lot of the moments that a lesser cast wouldn't have sold, that cast did. In fact, I'm going to go out on a limb here and say that I think Heather Langenkamp, who I like as an actress in the film, may be the weakest one in the film. And that's a compliment to the film because I think everyone is really very good. And as much as I don't like Johnny Depp today, he's very good in that. If that actor had stayed with us instead of what we got in the Pirates of the Caribbean films, it'd be just a better world in general. And yeah, I don't understand why anyone thought it was a good idea to take a character as dark as Freddy Krueger and turn him into a comedian. Like who conceived of that and said, well, what we want to do is this character who's described as a child molester and killer, and we want to make him into something funny and light and MTV accessible. I can't even imagine how that boardroom talk happened. So Al says Dream Warriors was good, but 1 and 2 are the best Nightmares on Elm Street. I'm going to disagree with you. I don't like 3. I 3 left such a bad taste in my mouth because I could see the future so clearly in it. It was, to me, today we'd use the word cringy, or we try not to use the word cringy if you're, a good human being. But that's how I felt in the theater, though. I felt like, oh, no, what are you doing? No, don't make jokes. Oh, and the scenes were overlit. It was overly stylized. It looked like comic book panels at times. It was not what I wanted from Freddy Krueger at all. And at that point, I was a fan, even though it sounds like I only like the first film. At that time, I liked the second film a lot. I like it less in today's estimation than I did when I was a kid. But Al says, I enjoyed Nightmare 5. Well, I understand why you would. I think like in that series, there's you have to pick what you're going to forgive. And if you forgave 5, cool. I'm down with you. I can't forgive 3. I can't forgive 4. 4 is literally like something that should have been shot for MTV. 6 is unbearable. New Nightmare New Nightmare gets a lot of credit for its concept, but the concept was nothing new. Fulci's Nightmare Concert, Cat in the Brain did it first, and I think did it, even though it did it very crudely, it did it better, which is a little bit of a weird thing. Refining an idea isn't always a good thing. Sometimes leaving an idea in its primal form is a stronger, smarter move. So I give Fulci the win over Craven in that case. James Ross says, also, Lorna, I was happy you did that interview with Kathy Koja because it's great to know the cipher will be back in print because, my goodness, that book goes for crazy prices. Well, I just saw the ARC copies online, so it's back. I will say this: if you're trying to buy older books from eBay or Amazon, stop doing that. Go to abebooks.com and buy from other sellers who are willing to sell it for reasonable prices. Now, there's going to be people who are out of control. If you look at my own titles, there's this one book that's a guy's trying to sell. I'll tell this story. So I go to one of the first times I ever went to the site. I was looking for books. I wasn't looking for myself. But then, curiosity, I put my own name and say, I wonder how cheap. And there was cheap copies of some of my early books. But then there was one book that was going for like $2,000. And I'm like, I'll sell copies of it for $2,000. And I look in, and they say that it's in plain as day. It says signed copy. And the problem with that was I've never signed a copy of that book. Never. Not to anyone. So there's some just real scam artists out there. So I reached out to ABU and said, you need to take this listing down. And it took like a month for them to reply, but they replied and they said, thank you for letting us know. They were very good. But you can find really great deals there. And I recommend hitting them up. Because the thing is, a lot of times when these reissues come out, they're not cheap either. Sometimes deluxe editions come out and they're beautiful books, but you're looking at spending $50 on a book. And I get it, but it's kind of like special edition Blu-rays. If you're only going to watch it, once every 5 years, do you really want to pay $35 for a disc just to have it on your shelf and say, look, I own it? Maybe you do. There are collectors out there. I'm a film lover more than I am a collector. Same thing with books. I like reading books. You realize you're not going to read a book every month of your life, so it's a little bit different timetable. But if I'm never going to read a book again, I don't necessarily need it on my shelf as a trophy. It's not like I went to the Sahara and shot a tiger, Rush's Ashes, I think we're talking Nightmare on Elm Street still, says, when I first saw them, I liked number 2 and the rest sucked. I didn't realize the subtext. Haha. I thought it was this camp in the 80s. Here's the thing, Rush. You're right. Because we're playing up this angle that it was all this homosexual metaphor. And it's there. There's no question about it. But I don't think that every frame was intended as that metaphor. I think a lot of it is just a generic slasher film that in times under or overestimated the effect of a joke or a horrific moment. So I think that we tend to look for even more meaning in a film like that because we know there's a little. And that's always the challenge of analyzing films is, and I'm guilty of this, you can overstep your boundaries easily. I just find it more interesting to talk about films seriously than to talk about, can you rate the Fridays? Well, everyone can rate the Fridays. It's not gonna change anyone else's opinion, so it becomes just this kind of ritual that happens in horror communities. And I'd rather have conversations about why we like things and what they mean to us and why we connect and how the writing tools are being used to make us care. That's what interests me. Jacob says, in general, I have nothing to contribute to the horror discourse when it comes to slashers. It is like the Christmas of genres. It consumes everything around it. So, Jacob, if you haven't seen Game Over, please, please, please see Game Over. Because it shows what can be done with that formula that's meaningful and impactful and beautiful. And I think that's the direction forward for the slashers. Because I really don't want just a bunch of kids going into the woods and getting slaughtered. We tend to hear that about a new Friday the 13th. Well, it's not brain surgery. Just get a bunch of kids, put them in the woods, and kill them one by one. Well, we have how many movies that do that? Not just in the Friday series. I think we have enough of that. But if you can find your clever touch, your way to take that framework and make it mean something again, or maybe for the first time make it mean something, then you have something. Hellfest is stylistically, I think, the best looking, feeling, sounding, acted slasher film that's ever been made. But it also is a great film about social pressures surrounding class in America. I have an old video you can look back on. It's only part one of non-existent 2. I probably will never make the second part of it because it did not go over well. But that movie is about class, but it's done so subtly and so smartly. So, Jacob, I'd say don't write off slashers, but I agree. We should stop talking slashers 24/7. We really should. And yeah, my walls have plenty of slasher stuff on them, and I am a fan. But I'm also a guy who, when I was setting up the first, 2 weeks of this channel's live incarnation, I knew I needed literary people on because I knew that would be better conversations. Would they get the immediate hits and the views? No, but those videos are going to do well consistently forever because I don't think that a lot of people have let people like Kathy Kojo or Brian Hodge or Mary Sangiovanni or some of the upcoming names just have their say. And I think in time, we're going to appreciate that more than to hear from, the sixth guy to play Michael Myers. No offense to the sixth guy who played Michael Myers. Let me see. Russia's S says Diabolic was a great comic book too. I've never read the comic book. I know it existed, and I know it was a strange paneler, whereas there was a newspaper incarnation and other. It's a very European thing. We're talking televisions, which I'm not going to get into. Jacob says, I think I've said this before, but Black Sunday is my favorite horror film of all time, with Cairo as a close second. I love Cairo's Last Act. I've said it before. That movie knows how to turn on a dime and pay everything off at the same time. It's an amazing, amazing film. But Black Sunday is definitely a great choice as your favorite film. It's growing on me, honestly. I bought both versions from Kino. Because I grew up watching the American AIP version of the film, the recut. And it was always a little bit weird that at a certain point, just the original Italian version was available. And it just felt different than what I'd seen as a kid. So it was great to have both. I would have appreciated them being in one box and being a single purchase. Hello, Kino. I don't think it's crazy to think that if you're going to buy Black Sunday, you're probably okay spending an additional $5 for a set that has both. But I've watched it. So I've watched it twice in the last 6 months. And I got to tell you, it continues to grow. It wouldn't surprise me if it ends up higher on my best of list. And it is my favorite Bava. For a while, Black Sabbath had overtaken it. But then I kind of had to be honest and say, well, it's not the third story, is the main reason. And that's probably not a good enough reason. James asks Jacob, but I'll answer it. What do you think of the original Dark Water? So Dark Water is a really interesting film because, of course, it's the Eliza Lamb story before Eliza Lamb. I like that movie. I don't think the remake is substantially worse or better than it in many ways. It's one of those rare remakes that is pointless because it's neither better or worse. It's just American, which I guess makes it worse because it came second. But it's not my favorite J-horror film. I think it has its moments, but moments don't make a classic film, and it certainly doesn't make something that's going to compare with Ringu or Cairo to me. Talking televisions. James says, thank you. I'll try out Abe's books. Yes, please do. James Frost asks, Lauren, what do you think of Tim Burton's Sleepy Hollow? I think Tim Burton's Sleepy Hollow had billboards that focused entirely on Christina Ricci's cleavage. That's what I think about the movie. I like what it wanted to do. I like that it wanted to look like a Hammer film or somewhere between a Hammer film or a post cycle AIP Corman film. And I think it succeeds sometimes, but then there's stuff that is like more traditionally Tim Burton in it. There's this one moment that really drives me nuts in that movie. It's just Johnny Depp as Ichabod Crane is in bed after he's first encountered the Headless Horseman, and he's acting like a child. He's holding the blankets, and it's just like this horrible overacting, which he wasn't known for at that point. He was still kind of an actor's actor at that point, and it's kind of the movie that kind of started tipping him over. You could see the later work in it, and I really wish that stuff wasn't there. I mean, it's great seeing Michael Gow in the beginning. There's a lot of great stuff in it. He's not used enough, but Christopher Walken is an awesome the Headless Horseman. So there's a lot to like about the movie, but there's a lot that prevents me from saying I love it. I would still like a perfect Headless Horseman story. The problem with that, of course, is that the story itself doesn't lend itself to what we want out of, a good horror movie. Washington Irving was writing a very realistic story about people using a legend to their own ends. We want the Hessian to be real. We do. And Burton gave us that, so I'm thankful for that. I'm just not particularly happy with every creative stylistic choice he made. Lost Cunningham says, I just finished Snarlorn, loved it. Went back to get a physical copy as $869.44 shipping. Well, send me an email. VisitedbyVoices@gmail.com. And I'm sure I can hook you up with something a lot more affordable than $869. You can find copies cheaper. I actually have my out of print titles. I have means to still get bound copies. They might not be quite as pretty as those first pressings, but I have to check my stock. I might have first pressings of Snarl still. I'm not sure, but send me an email. But thank you. That's really cool. Snarl came together real quick for me. It was a book that I didn't have written at the time I needed to submit it. So I wrote it very quickly, and then I revised the hell out of it. I think it's a good classic monster story in that it's, I don't mean the book is classic. I mean that the monster is classic. It's a werewolf story. At the time I wrote it, I remember thinking that the werewolf is actually much more of a film monster than a literary monster. There just really isn't a lot of classic werewolf fiction. Because you think like Gary Brandner, The Howling, or Live Girls by Ray Garton. But realistically, I mean, there's nothing on the level of Bram Stoker or Mary Shelley, or, there's just nothing that rises to that level. And so I said, well, what would that be if it was written today? And that's what I tried to write. My elevator pitch for everyone out there is a truck driver driving cross country hits an animal on the road on Christmas Eve. And when he gets out of his truck to check on the damage, he discovers that what he hit was something he could never have imagined. It was overly dramatic. Just Graham says, are you guys talking Black Sunday 1960 or 1977? Well, we're not talking about the blimp over the Super Bowl. That's what we're not talking about. Jacob says, I loved Game Over. Hellfest, not as much, though I do like Amy Forsyth. She was good in season 2 of Channel Zero, and the only thing I liked in We Summon the Darkness, I liked We Summon the Darkness, but I do agree that she's the best thing about that movie. Alexandra Daddario, I always screw up the pronunciation of her last name, is a stunning actress. But honestly, Amy Forsyth is like, she's so good at being both compelling, guarded, a little bit mysterious, just a little bit mysterious, because you can never completely read her motivations. I think she's a real great actress to lead any film, and she is the lead of that movie, and that's why it killed me that in the original posters and the original art that was released for the home video copies, she wasn't on it. The blonde girl that's with them was on it, which is ridiculous to me because that character is like the comic relief side character. They fixed it finally, and they put Amy Forsyth on the cover, which is why I ordered one actually today. Ordered a physical copy of that and One Cut of the Dead because I found deepdiscount.com has One Cut of the Dead steelbook currently for $17, so with free shipping. Russia's Ashes says, does Raymond Chandler at all find any space on your bookshelf? I'm fascinated with his hard-boiled novels and the fact that he's a genuine Victorian-era born dude who wrote all these Sin City-style novels. I've read some Chandler. I don't own... I've been through a number of moves, and what happens when you move is you make some hard choices about heavy things. So, there's certain heavy things that you're like, oh, that's got to come, like furniture. But you look at things like books, and you just got to make some decisions. And it's an easy decision for me because I like the idea of selling books back to used bookstores. I like the idea of books circulating and stories circulating. So it's not uncommon for me to get a hold of a book and then keep it moving forward. That said, I'm not a big library guy. And that's something that really confuses some people because they're like, whoa, that's the ultimate democracy of, fiction. But it's not, in my opinion, because what it does is it sets people into this mindset that they should only get as excited as the wait list, and it also prevents them from really getting flesh in the game on anything. I think there is something to be said about the fact that when you have too much availability to any art, you get really picky. I see a lot of a younger generation, people who are coming up never knowing a world without streaming, for instance. And they'll be like, oh, I turned that movie off after 10 minutes. I turned that. I went to this. I started watching The Office instead. Whereas like those of us of a certain age, we stuck with anything that we rented / went to the movie theater / was on television because it was all we had. So you wanted it to be good. You never kind of looked down your nose until a movie or a book, television show really, really disappointed you. So I think that's gotten lost. But yes, I've read Chandler. I think that he was a wonderful stylist prose writer. Plot-wise, I think it was interesting how he'd take basically short stories worth of material and stretch it out to novels, and it never felt like it. But there's not a whole lot of plot really to Chandler. Al says, Graduation Day versus Slaughter High, and explain why. Probably Graduation Day. Slaughter High feels really cheap to me. I mean, they're both cheap, but Slaughter High feels really cheap to me. And at the level we're talking in the slasher thing, I think I am drawn to films that feel like real films, which is one of the reasons, everyone knows my Friday 5 thing. It just looks cheap. And that's my biggest problem with the movie is it never looked as good as with the films that came before it. Or any of the films that came after it, by the way. So I guess Graduation Day wins because it looks like a movie. Graduation Day doesn't have as much going on in it as has pacing problems, but Slaughter High, again, just feels really cheap to me. And it doesn't help you have a recycled score and other things going on in it that you're like, they didn't even try. So I think I'm finally getting that Halloween question here from Crystal Lake Counselor 77. Lauren, if Michael Myers didn't have Judith as a sibling, would he have attempted to kill his parents or Laurie when she was younger, assuming the Halloween 2 1981 storyline is intact? Let me get this straight. So you're saying if he didn't have Judith, would he have had to kill Laurie? And that's suggesting that, you see, I always felt that Laurie, that the idea was that Laurie had been adopted out of the house before the events of Judith's murder. Because the timeline is a bit funky, if not, right? But I will tell you this. I've always had this. If I was ever asked to write a Halloween film, my story would be Michael going after his parents. The idea would be, I'm giving away the farm here, but the idea would be that Michael lives in an abandoned mental. Basically, Smith's Grove has closed. It's been shuttered, and he still lives in the basement. And there's other insane people who are just, they were released and they all came back. And the idea would be that as there's a reporter trying to investigate the story of what happened to Michael Myers, and that involved going to Smith's Grove. And like an idea I really like for the franchise is that Michael Myers only is the shape on Halloween itself. Maybe a day on either side. The rest of the year, he's basically just catatonic wherever he is. Not completely like in a coma, like in Halloween 5, but he's catatonic. And then, like, when the clock hits a certain hour, he just springs to life and he gets back to business. And I like the idea of him having to go back from Smith's Grove back, and he's going to a retirement community where his elderly parents are. And it's about this reporter trying to desperately stop the coming rampage and that murder. I think that gives a framework that makes sense inside the franchise, but also gives you your ticking clock, which is what I think a lot of the later Halloween series just really don't have, is the sense of urgency with their story. I think the fourth film, which I don't love, has a sense of urgency. It just doesn't know what to do with it, which is a different problem. But, hey, James, I actually, I just read Black Hills. So Dan Simmons' novel Black Hills is a difficult read. It's written from the point of view of a young Native man, mostly. And it's a tough read. It's very, very stylized. It's not like Simmons' other work in many ways. It is in that he loves to drop himself into a time period and just use all the vernacular from that time period. But in this particular case, it was very tough for me. I'd say the weirdest thing about that book is that the beginning is stronger than the end, which is not typical of Simmons. It's a big novel too. I'm taking it you've already read The Terror and you've already read Drood, which I think are going to be remembered as his crowning couple years. Long after many people had written him off, by the way. He had a second win like no one. But yeah, no, I'm a big Dan Simmons fan. Let's see. James Frost asks, what do you think of Francis Ford Coppola's Dracula? On Cameron's channel, All This Filming, Is It Healthy? I was on and we were discussing Dracula. My thing about Dracula is, God, how to put this? I don't love it. And that's almost worse than if I didn't like it, because it was so the opportunity that it was that moment where Coppola could have said, I want to do anything. And he would have been given the money and the resources to do it. And the project was not, hampered in any way. There was no stop. There was no studio interference. It was whatever Coppola wanted to do, and he wanted to do Dracula. And I look at the finished film, and it's kind of chaotic, and it has a lot of weirdness to it just to have weirdness to it. And I really wish that it had probably just percolated for another year and he really just ironed it out, because it looks like a lot of that film was, found in the edit. And it's one of those cases where, no, he should have waited. I think there's a great Francis Ford Coppola's Dracula film that didn't get made. Rush says, I respect that circulation keeps old stuff alive. It does, especially in books, because books will survive. It's one piece of media that will be around in some form. Jess Graham says, very true. We rented a movie, we were invested in it, and we almost always finished it no matter how bad it was. Yeah, and now a lot of those titles are people are rebuying, and there's these $30 limited editions. And I think that's the interesting draw of nostalgia. I think nostalgia is a bad thing, but here's the thing. I can't go into some kind of hardline rant about nostalgia entirely and be honest, because the problem is there's not enough great new stuff coming out. So of course people are looking in the rearview mirror for the great stuff, because the new stuff is disappointing in general. And I'm generalizing, and I'm talking more about domestic product. Jess asks, saying Judith was the trigger, maybe. I don't view it that way. the way I view Halloween and Michael Myers is that he was a regular kid, and something entered him on Halloween. Um, some force, not a ghost, it's not a possession plot, but some force that has always been in the world that used to be appeased by Celtic ritual. I'm not talking Thorn either. That's like a dumbed down version of what I'm talking about. And at that moment, Michael Myers, the kid that his family had known, was just gone, replaced by this thing. This, child with only murder on his mind who needed to kill his family. To me, it's something that could be done very effectively on screen. So I don't think Judith is the trigger. I think Judith is the first thing in his path after that happens. That's how I would view it. And that's how I'd present it if it was, mine to present. But why would so he asks, but why would Laurie have been given up before the murder? Well, it seems to me that she should have been alive, but she's not in the house. Michael Myers is not a middle-aged man when he escapes from Smith Grove. And I'd have to look at the math, but my impression was always that Laurie, if she's 17, well, I don't think the murder was 17 years, it was 18 years earlier. So to me, she's not shown in that house, which of course we all understand is from a storytelling point of view, that decision hadn't been made at that point. It was made during the making of the second film. So there's a practical reason for it. But my plot, the plot mechanism in my head says that she was probably given up as an infant and didn't grow up in that house at all. Good night, Al. Have a great one, man. Jess says, I like that catatonic idea for Michael. I think it's the only way to make it work, because otherwise, what is Michael Myers doing the rest of the work? Does he get a fast food job? Does he go grocery shopping? I mean, it doesn't really work, right? And the reason, one of the things in my mind is, if he's back in Smith's Grove, in the basement of Smith's Grove, and the other like insane patients bring him food, scraps of food, and they kind of like throw it at the floor, and he grabs it, and he slowly reaches for it and grabs it and eats it slowly, methodically, like in this like almost dream state, this catatonic dream state. And that's how he exists all year long until he's called up. I like that idea. I think that at least gives a framework for the character that we don't have currently. Jason's easier. Jason drowned as a boy, so we don't have to worry about logic to his character. But Michael is portrayed as so realistic. And I know that's dangerous from the fourth film on anyway, but to me, I just would like to. I'd love a film that just gives us an answer that's not an answer, if that makes sense to you, because I never want to demystify Michael Myers. I never want to give an answer, but I'd like to give like a framework to the mystery. So Chris Lake says, Michael escapes on Halloween Eve. Besides being able to blend in with other costume people, were we to believe Halloween was significant to Michael? Again, I think it's like it's Samhain. It's the ancient Celtic festival. It's the equinox. I think you got to make it something like that to make it make sense. Which again, I think the writers of the Thorn films kind of were trying for that. They just did a horrible, horrible job with it. Las Cunningham says, I know you're a Hazing fan. What are your thoughts on the Convent and Pledge Night? I haven't seen Pledge Night. It's one of those films that I don't know why, but I haven't pulled the trigger on it. It's available. It's very available. The Convent is a film that I had on bootleg VHS like a year before its release. Everyone was talking it up, and it's okay. I don't see the extreme love that other people have for it. It's okay. It's fine. James Frost asks, what do you think of Shin Godzilla from 2016? Went to go see it in the theater. I liked it a lot. I thought it was really clever. I don't think it's a movie you can rewatch very often, though. I mean, it's about the government not knowing how to respond to a natural disaster. It's about boardroom meetings and classifying, where does a kaiju attack get classified in the budget process. And I think that's great. And so for a one-time viewing, it's a mind-blowing experience. But there's so little monster action. Like people complain about the the most recent, well, not most recent anymore, the most recent first American Godzilla film not having enough Godzilla in it. But there's probably less of them in Shin. Certainly in anywhere near a final form. I would like it to be a one-off, though. I would not want to see them continue that into a proper series. Jess says, that sounds like it. Celtic Eagle got into Michael was more of the Halloween 3 cult than the Thorn. Yeah, I think that I think that you could do something without a cult necessarily. I don't think Michael needs a support group. But again, I think you want to keep this all kind of floaty and hazy and scary because it's unknown. You just give enough hint about it. And I think that's real why, like Loomis's speech in the schoolhouse when Michael's written Samway on the chalkboard. I think that starts to build that bridge. I just think they could have done a little bit more with it, but not demystifying it. Because just like, the Friday 13th debate, constantly hear people say, oh, we should see Mr. Voice. I never want to see that character. That character being missing is one of the great things about the Jason character. The weird insinuation that perhaps it's something of an immaculate birth it's good for the character. Mystery is good for our supernatural characters. It's very bad when you give them elaborate backstories and explain and show extended family. That's bad. You don't want to do that. Rush says, your Halloween ideas need making a reality. Absolutely towers over the shit we're going to get in the next film. Oh, someone's done some research. I will never be hired to write a Halloween film. Let me tell you that. It'll never happen. Not because I don't think I'm qualified. I don't think that's it. These films come together very quickly. And because they have no time to waste, they go with people whose track record is of bringing in product on time. I'm an unknown to the Hollywood crowd. And novel writing is apples to oranges. They wouldn't consider that. So I have a better chance if I ever wanted to get into filmmaking of developing an original property than to get into any of these long-running franchises, frankly. Just because the industry still is not spending any time or money or aggravation on the horror genre. It'd be different if A24 were making a Halloween or Friday 13th, I suppose, but those are dreams that we shouldn't even dare to dream. Jess Graham says, I love that idea. Would you keep your Michael Myers script within the original series timeline? You know what? I have very strong feelings about this. Is that, and same thing with all your long-running franchises. I don't believe in branched timelines at all. I believe what you do is you make a film that doesn't explicitly endorse the chapters you want to ignore, but you do not go out of your way to erase them. And that's a careful line, but I think you have to be respectful of all fans. Everyone, I think, here knows that I'm a huge Alien 3 fan. When they started talking about making a new Alien 3 that erased 3 because no one likes it, well, I'm the guy who likes it. And to me, you want to talk about me walking into a film not wanting to like it? Well, that's a good way to do it. So I don't believe in erasing films. You can ignore them, or you can sidestep them without erasing them. And I think that's what I would do. It would be ultimately made so that it could be any, variation of of Halloween, whether we're talking about, the Rob Zombie or the original, the 2018. Doesn't really matter as long as you're not using any of those characters. There's no reason why you have to place it distinctly in one of those timelines, and I think that's the way forward for all this stuff. Chris Light Castro says Michael was stabbed in the neck, eye, stomach, and took 6 slugs from Loomis. How can they continue to classify him as human? He clearly isn't, unless he leaves from his fall and dies in the street. So I think what we're talking about here, I mean, I'll point out that 50 Cent was shot how many times? But what I would say is that the horror film has always been an extremely stylized form. And there's a line in the sand, and I don't always know where it is, either to you or anyone else. We all have our opinions. How far is too far into fantasy? You don't want to have something be 100% based in reality, because those are not interesting movies to watch. So you do need to have sort of an elaborate, exaggerated reality inside the horror genre. But where is that line? To me, I think once you say, well, Michael Myers can't die, once you say that out loud, it's fundamentally different than the first two films. And that's I see the first two films as the core of what Halloween is. And I would look to never contradict those movies. Obviously, 2018 decided the second film didn't happen, which a decision I still don't understand to this day, because it actually fixes some of the script problems in their script. But whatever. Rush Zasha says, loved Shin Godzilla. I appreciate the way they made it look vintage. There's a lot to love about that movie. Again, it's just not particularly as rewatchable as some of the others in that long-running franchise. I would say, and I know I'm in the minority here, I know that when I had Jeremy Graham on, my old friend Jeremy, he agreed with me. He actually suggested it first, but I loved the last Godzilla film, King of the Monsters. I loved it. That is, to me, as close to those classic Godzilla films I grew up watching, on a small black and white television back in, 1980, 81. So it hit all the sweet spots for me. I have no problem with that movie at all. If the next film, if Godzilla vs. Kong is 3/4 as good as that movie, I'll love that too. But I'm not sure if I'll get a better modern Godzilla than we got in Godzilla King of the Monsters. And I get that no one's going to agree with me on that, but that's how I felt. And I continually say to you guys, I'm an emotional watcher. I'm not an intellectual watcher. Jacob says the combination of practical and CGI effects in Shin is something Hollywood should learn from. Otherwise, I don't care about it. I respect it more than I like it. So I just saw Jurassic Park at the drive-in theater last week, and it's remarkable now how obvious it is how little CGI is in that movie. A lot of things we in the past probably thought were CGI or had more CGI clearly don't when you see it on a big enough screen. And I think that CGI in general should be used to fix rather than create. Now, you might say, how can you have a scene of a velociraptor running through a field and have it practical? I get you. I'm not saying every shot, but whenever you can do a practical shot, I think you should. Because there is something about the uncanny valley, and there is something about just weight, gravity, and shadow that computers are never really going to be able to overcome. So, Jess Graham says, I agree. I don't need to see Elias Voorhees. We already know too much about him. Kind of like you were saying, the more they take away the mystery or anything like that, the less scary it becomes. So there's a scene in Phantasm where they go to a fortune teller, and the fortune teller presents a box with a hole in it and tells the boy to stick his hand in the hole. And we never see what's in the box. We just deal with the fact that he looks like he's in a horrible existential pain from whatever's in there. That's kind of what horror is. A good horror movie asks you to put your hand in the box. And because we love this stuff, we put our hands in the box. And too often, the box has been empty. And so I think part of the reason, if the box was glass and you could see in it, and you saw whatever you were getting into, it's automatically not as scary, right? But if you look inside that box and see a bear trap, it's horrible, but it's a different sort of thing. It's not scary. It's kind of just morbid at that point if you put your hand in. So I think there's a difference between what like the Saw and Hostel films do well, and I like both those films. I won't say I like both those series, but I like the Saw series, the first Hostel film I like, but it's just a different thing, and I like not knowing where my hand's going. That sounds very wrong. James asks, what do you guys think is the worst Japanese Godzilla film? All Monsters Attack, Godzilla's Revenge is just awful. To me, nothing is redeeming about it. That's a good choice. I would say, yeah, Godzilla's Revenge is really it's really trash. Although I'll tell you that people like Smog Monster, but I spent a lot of time laughing at Smog Monster rather than with it. So that's probably got to be on the list too. And I'm about to get hate because people love that movie. Jess says, thank you. You don't have to address the crap you don't like in previous films, but don't erase them. That's right. That's right. Listen, if I was making an Alien film, it wouldn't erase Aliens. And everyone knows I strongly dislike Aliens, but I would not erase it. Rush's Ashes says, problem people had with Alien 3 is the Dark Horse comic had a story following adult Newt being the main character. Then the film killed her off before the plot. I think there's people that's definitely true of Rush's, but I think the bigger problem, well, there's two problems. It was the beginning of a movement in viewership where people felt like they owned the movies in these franchises and owned the direction. They were never going to be okay with killing off Hicks and Newt. Which to me is so ridiculous, because if all characters aren't fair game, we're not even in the genre anymore. And that is the second problem, which is they just made a very popular, accessible action film. And the fact that they didn't want to make another one of them, they wanted to go and make a, nihilistic horror film, and basically an existential horror film. Alien 3 is basically an astronaut who's lost his tether to the space station and is drifting through space, knowing inevitably he's going to die, whether it's a question of whether the oxygen runs out first or the cold gets so deep into the suit that he freezes to death. But it's going to happen. That is what Alien is. Alien 3 is. It's this extraordinarily dark film about accepting the fact that you are going to die. And everything around you is going to facilitate that happening in some way. That's hard medicine for some people coming off of a film with, jokes about little girls leading teams because she's survived. I don't want to get into my Aliens rant, but I mean, just the tonal shift was just so big. And Alien 3 it's this kind of distorted film compared to the series that came before it. For myself, I love that. But yeah, but I agree with you. The comic book fans probably were like, what the hell? Jacob says, I feel like I'm the only one who can't stand Newt as a character. Another reason to vastly prefer the original to the frankly overrated sequel. And you don't have to stop there. There's a ton of things. I have problems with the Newt character, period. Because in fiction, and specifically in horror fiction, but in any form of dark fiction, if your villain can't kill a little girl who's alone on a planet for months, or at least weeks, or even days, it's just not that scary of a villain. The other thing is, I mean, the logic doesn't make any sense. I mean, when the aliens are born, they're like, little chest burster guys. And in the first film, it goes into the ductworks, and that's where it hides from the crew, who could presumably more easily trap and kill it. Well, Newt hiding in the ductwork, it exactly contradicts the logic of the first film. And I have a problem with that stuff. I wouldn't have a problem if Aliens didn't ask us to take it seriously, but it consistently asks us to take it seriously. And then you lose me. And you see, you've managed to get me to start talking about Aliens. Chris Lake Counselor says, Lauren, do you feel Carpenter had the camera on the knife as Michael stabbed Judith? Clearly, I don't believe a 6-year-old would watch the knife as it kills his sister. Yeah, there wasn't a. I think even if you look at how high the camera angle is. I mean, the camera pans down to look at the knife being pulled out of the drawer. So that already kind of like suggests that we're not really in the point of view of a character this young. Also, he's looking down on Judith as she's, topless in her room, combing her hair. So it's like this, and it's a top-down look, which doesn't make a lot of sense for a 6-year-old. But again, sometimes the cumulative effect of a film is more important than being technically perfect. I don't think that opening murder sequence has anything wrong with it, even if it doesn't completely work. Russia's asks Jason's dad had a name. I don't know it, and will try to never remember it. I wish I didn't. Tom McLaughlin came up with the Elias Voorhees thing, had it added to the script, had it storyboarded. Ultimately, it wasn't filmed, but name checked in Jason Goes to Hell. There's a deleted scene where they go through the family the family's entire history, and how there could be a sister that was not Pamela Voorhees' daughter. But the scene missing is problematic because people always point out, like, we just invented a character, and they did, but they justified it in that scene. But with some of the film like Jason Goes to Hell, you just got to either go with it or not. Trying to make logic of that movie is just, it's futile exercise. I like it, and I just go with it. But yeah, don't try and fit it into the proper chronology of the series. Les Cunningham says, is Phantasm cosmic horror or sci-fi horror? I don't care particularly. I think it's an awesome example of what we need now, which is a ton of creativity. People were having these same conversations in the 70s. Oh, all the stories have been told. There's nothing new to be said. And then Don Coscarelli comes out with Phantasm, and no one had seen anything like it. We can have that again easily. We just have to start really trusting storytellers again. That's all. And we got to support them when they come out. That's the other thing. It kind of pains me that when Annihilation came out, we ignored it, because although you could say, you create algebra in your head, add this film to this film to this film, and you get Annihilation. By the same rate, it was based on a novel. It was a complete story. It wasn't a trope into itself. And, generally speaking, no one wanted to know the movie. And still, people don't talk about it. And when I have these conversations with horror fans, no one mentions Annihilation. And Jeff Vandermeer deserves the credit for creating something. Russia's Ashes says, first Godzilla I saw was Destroy All Monsters, leading up to the 1998 film being released. Traumatized me as an 8-year-old. There was a scene a woman has her earrings pulled out. So I don't know what my first Godzilla was. I'm sure it was not the original, because it was whatever was playing on UHF. I have so many memories of UHF channels playing Godzilla movies as a kid that I don't have any idea of how many times it actually happened, but it seems like it happened every other weekend. And it always felt good to me. Godzilla was much like Jason Voorhees in that he was a consistent presence in my life. I connected more firmly with Jason in my teens, whereas Godzilla was more of a something that as a 6 to 12-year-old I was really into. But it shows how you can really use these, use the horror genre and use monster movies to really affect people's entire lives, and I think in positive ways. These movies have given me so much joy and so much direction in my life. I would never have been able to write a novel if I didn't write a horror novel. There's just no way. So I have a lot to be grateful for to the genre. Russia's Ashes says, Alien 3 feels more modern compared to the very 80s Aliens. I agree with that. I think it feels like a Fincher movie. I really do. He also says, I enjoyed Alien 3. Biggest problem is the effects, mainly bad CG aliens. Well, the interesting thing about that is there's no CGI aliens in the movie. It was all composite work done with miniatures in the original theatrical cut. The problem is the compositing work is pretty atrocious. They didn't want to use traditional blue screens, which was the technology at the time. So they used a very complex matting system to do it, and it doesn't look great at all times. But there are shots where it is pretty seamless too. But then when you get to Alien Resurrection, you get CGI aliens, and they look like they're color formed onto the page. So it's pretty awful. Jacob McCullough says, I feel Candyman is more of a gothic horror film than a slasher film. Am I off base? It seems to often be referred to as a slasher. Well, you see, I think the slasher title sometimes is too narrowly defined. And I think that's a problem, because I think human monsters using sharp implements is not necessarily just a guy in the woods with a machete. I think you can do a lot with that concept, because the monster isn't terribly important what it is. It's what it does and how it interacts with our characters. It's the plot. It is the atmosphere. So I think there's every possibility of a slasher film being every bit as effective and scary as any other type of horror movie. But the more we kind of define things as a bunch of kids go in the woods and only 2 come out or 1 comes out, we're doing ourselves a disservice. Rush says, I was watching it the other day, showing my girlfriend 8 years old the saga. She barely notices. I'm not sure what we're referring to. Jess says, my least favorite Alien is Resurrection or Alien versus Predator Requiem, if that counts. It's unwatchable. Alien Resurrection is weird because I keep wanting to give it the benefit of the doubt, and I've never had a good viewing of it. I think it's just kind of a disrespectful film. I think the filmmakers had a vision, and that's very clear, and it has a look and it has a feel. It's not completely without atmosphere, but it feels like the wrong choice for an Alien film all the way through. It should have been its own thing with just different monsters, I guess. Oh, I love this question. James Frost says, what do you think of the Underworld movies? So this is going to shock you to no end. I love the Underworld movies, and I'm not being satirical. And I'm not a guy who I don't watch vampire movies. I mean, I really don't. I've seen classics, but when new ones come out, I don't go see them. I don't even like later. I like Near Dark, but I don't like Lost Boys, and really Near Dark vampire. It's almost unnecessary. Take the transfusion scene out at the end. You could make the same film as kind of a hard crime story with just like a group of insane psychopaths. You really could. But I think the Underworld films do something that I wish more movies would do. And that's that they hired great older actors. I wish they hired great older actresses as well. They didn't. And it elevated everything. Those movies look and feel way better than they have any right to. And yeah, the CGI fight scenes and everything, yeah, it's over the top, but it never reached that level for me of like the Resident Evil films, where you kind of just shut off at a certain point. You're just watching pretty colors. The Underworld films, they work for me as little Shakespearean dramas. And they're cheap and they're tawdry, and I love them. If I have a soap opera and it's not called Saw, it's probably called Underworld. Rush says it was a shame the first time we saw the Xenomorph swim in water was so obviously CGI. Yeah. Resurrection has its issues, definitely. And that's also the problem. Like, Resurrection wanted to cut the difference. It wanted to be more like Aliens, but it wanted to have this kind of like stylized Fifth Element almost look to it. Fifth Element works because it's its own thing. Alien Resurrection just falls on its face constantly. A great cast, but they're all asked to be so extreme in their performances. I hate shit like Ripley making the basket over her head, because if you're going to overpower a character to that degree, what are we even watching at that point? I mean, everyone's Superman, it's no. Rush's Ashes says, yes, I also love the Underworld flicks. You know, and a lot of people will say, well, it's just because you like Kate Beckinsale and Leather. And while I think everyone likes Kate Beckinsale and Leather, I think that the movies are actually smarter than people give them credit for. And there's a formula, definitely, you know, but I think they're good films. I remember when I saw Blood Wars in the theater, I was just grinning the entire time because it was so it felt like what exploitation movies should feel like today. And that's not to say I like every choice and I don't necessarily love again all the CGI, but man, it was so fun. I love that. I was pissed off when it came to the 4K UHD disc came out, and it was horrifically dark unless you had a really well tuned HDR television. Because the 4K television, the first one I had, did not have HDR. It was an early model, and the film was like watching a black screen. Seriously, and they came with the Blu-ray and the 4K. And I always watched the Blu-ray because you could make out what was happening. Now I have a pretty awesome television, and it's not a issue. But I think that's part of the problem too. Is like, you know, with getting people to convert over to 4K UHD. If they have just one bad experience with a movie because they don't have the right equipment, or you know, the equipment's not properly calibrated, they're going to say, screw this. The average person does not want to spend time on that stuff. And, you know, James is saying the Blood Wars was ridiculous, but yeah, it was really fun. I love the fact that they kill off Kate Beckinsale like 3/4 of the way through the movie, and you know she's coming back. Like, you know she's coming back, but you're not expecting her to bring her back like with all these ridiculous like X-Men powers. It's so fun. It's when people tell me like they like, oh, I like films where it's that are just dumb fun. I always point out that so do I, but that doesn't excuse those films from being, you know, cheap or tawdry or bad. You just have to lean into what you are. And if you're just a dumb action film that gives itself a gothic industrial horror look, I'm down. Just be that thing. Just be it. Own it. Jacob says, I think part of what works against the horror filmmaker is the way they're pigeonholed. Directors like Stuart Gordon and David Cronenberg thrived, in my opinion, because they were willing to leave horror. Yeah, well, I think a lot of people try and leave horror, but the problem is that the pigeonholing is an issue. But there is a bigger issue, which would be what you would hear from industry people if they talk about it, which is that horror films were kind of a separate industry from mainstream film. They're made differently. So on a mainstream film, you would score out your screenplay. If you've seen a screenplay and you see a ton of numbers next to scenes, that's a screenplay that's been scored out. And what happens then is someone is paid to go through it and take it apart scene by scene and put it into a shooting order of what makes sense from a financial standpoint to film where. And that can be because you have certain actors for certain blocks of days. It can be because you have certain props that you want to use in quick succession so that you can get rid of the prop, or maybe move it, that prop is needed in a different location. So this entire art of how to film these movies. Now, when the horror film is different because there's so many special effects, and the art department basically is twice its size as it would be in a conventional film because of the special effects and because of anything else you need that's highly stylized. And you have a whole second unit running just to do that stuff in horror films. So people who work in horror films tend to be thought of as, well, I can't put them on my big comedy or my big drama because they're not used to working on these kind of films where you have to work with the actors kind of intimately, and it's thought of as you're more of a broad manager when you're a horror film director, less of an artist. Because pulling off films with a lot of special effects or a lot of intricate design is thought of as its own thing. It's just separate. And horror films are made cheaply, so they're all assuming that they're used to working very, very, very quickly and sloppily, which was true at a certain time. I think it's a scarlet letter that they shouldn't still have, but it's certainly true. So it's hard to break out. So Jess says, I watched the original Underworld when it first came out in theaters. My friend Kevin Graveau got us tickets to see it at Universal Studios Theater. I thought it was entertaining, but it's nothing special. Here's the thing, I'd agree with you. I think the first film is the worst of the bunch. I think it's a series that just gets better and better as it goes on, as it embraces being this ridiculous thing. I can't, in good faith, tell you to go out and buy a box set and watch them all, because Jess, you have to be down for it. You have to make a decision that you want this ride. But for me, I do want that ride. Whereas Resident Evil films, even though I love Mila Jovovich, no. And one of those even has Kim Coates in it. So, and my answer is still no. James Frost says, what did you think of Daybreakers? I saw it in theaters. I remember nothing about it. It was some kind of vampire film with a blade plot. Basically, there was someone who could walk in the day, right? That's always what vampire films want to do, is get the vampires to not be killed by sunlight. That's their thing, which I love, because in Bram Stoker's novel, Dracula walks around in daylight all the time. It's not an issue. Chris Lake Counselor 77 says, Lauren, do you know if the deleted scene of Dana being sexually assaulted by the beast on the ceiling in Poltergeist exists on film? If so, will it ever be released? I don't know. You've seen the storyboards, I take it. You can find them easily online. So Poltergeist is one of those things, people don't understand what a producer does, and that's why people think that Spielberg directed Poltergeist. No, he produced the film. A producer has a lot of say in every single aesthetic choice. And when you put a score like the Poltergeist score down on a film, when you control the editing bay, you can make a film look like your movie, even if you didn't direct it. So I always say, I think Tobe Hooper absolutely is the director of the film, but I think Spielberg is the producer. And I think if you understand the roles, I think that the movie you get makes a lot of sense. If I had to bet money, I'd say I don't think it probably was filmed. I think they decided by that point that this wasn't going to be the harder film that, ultimately was released. We got a film that wasn't child friendly, but it was teen friendly. Definitely. They wanted 13-year-olds to be able to be in that theater. Do I think that's a problem? No, I don't have a problem with PG-13 horror. I have a problem with certain subgenres being PG. Like the slasher film should not be PG, because we're talking about films where really the thing of merit is the violent set pieces. And if you can't do those properly because of your rating, it just becomes pointless. Does that mean that no one could write a perfect slasher that happens to be PG-13? I'm not saying that. I think you could do that. But it also feels like, why would you bother at that point? If you're that talented, please create something new and original, because you're a winner. We need you on the right side of this. But if you haven't seen the storyboards, check them out. It's not an extraordinarily graphic scene, but it would have been like a quicker version of something from The Entity. Jacob McCullough says, also, I don't want to give the impression that I hate slashers entirely. I dig stuff like Evil Dead Trap, Stage Fright, and House on Sorority Row. However, I'm done with talking about stuff like The Prowler. Yeah, I've said it before. Like, I wish we could talk less about slashers too. Or at least talk about them the right way. And if we could stop talking about the garbage slashers and pretending they're more than they are, I'd be very, 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 very welcoming to those conversations. But I won't lie to you. I'm working on a video right now called How Friday the 13th Became Horror's Star Wars. And it's going to do very well. Whereas, I put up a video yesterday about defining the giallo, and, it's doing okay. But if it said defining the slasher, immediately it'd be doing twice as well. So, and I don't want it to sound like I'm all about just people watching, the number of people watching my videos, but it is a concern because I need to grow this channel in order to do some of the big stuff I want to do. I have big plans. Again, it's all about building a community. It's not about me, but it's got to build. I can't just have what we have now. So. James Frost says, I think Blood Wars and Evolution are the most fun of the Underworld movie. I think Blood Wars is definitely. Evolution is a lot of fun. I love the fact they keep teasing the daughter. I think that's great. Jacob McCullough says, what do you think of sequels that are spiritually connected rather than literally connected? Examples being Halloween 3, Curse of the Cat People, 10 Cloverfield Lane, etc. I really like 10 Cloverfield Lane as its own movie. And I even like the goofy ending. Because you know what? It's cool they went there. No one thought they'd go there. They went there. It's cool. Curse of the Cat People, I have very different feelings about. I love the original film so much that a soft fantasy film as a follow-up really is a weird pill to take. It's okay as its own thing, but it's hard. It's hard for me to accept it. I love Season of the Witch. I wonder at the point we're making spiritually connected or spiritually inspired films, why don't we just make those into their own thing? I think it's a better world where we value the original property so much that that's the first impulse, is to make something new, not have to attach some tagline on it or title or subtitle to connect it to something else. I understand the business reality of it, but I think if we, at some point, we're going to need to turn away from what we're doing now. And we're going to have to figure out a way to revalue, if that's a word, original properties. James asks, have you read John Steakley's novel Vampires? That's Vampires with a dollar sign at the end. I have. I remember very little about it, except that it was, like the Catholic Church paying hunters to kill vampires. I remember very little. I remember being a quick read too. I probably read it like in an afternoon. Russia's Ash says, I always thought the producer was more powerful than a director. Am I wrong? You are not wrong. So we have to think of it. This is the metaphor I use is this. Imagine a movie. Well, stop. Just stop. First of all, let's talk about credits for a second, and I'll get there. When you watch a movie, the first thing you see is the distributor. So Universal Pictures Presents. That's the people who are taking the movie and putting it in a theater or on home video, or they're licensing it to a television. They're the distributor. The second thing you see is the production house. And so that you see a Universal Pictures Presents a working titles release or a working titles film. And then the third thing you get is the director. So what's important to understand is that when you get that second credit, that is who hires the producer. So already you're talking about a level up, right? From the consumer's point of view of how it reaches the consumer. So the producer is responsible to deliver to the distributor what they've contracted. So they're responsible for a film that is a film in all ways. So it's been photographed, it's been scored by music, it has professional actors, the art direction conveys exactly what the initial screenplay suggests it should. They're responsible for the screenplay, the story, they're responsible for everything in the production. The director is about actualizing the game plan. And the game plan is the screenplay, the storyboards, the shot lists, but he's not in charge of developing the shot lists. He's not in charge of the scheduling out of a production's shooting schedule. He's not in charge of contracting the actors. Now, he might have a say in any of those things, depending on his experience and his relationship with the producer. But the director is supposed to go down there and go between the different heads of the departments, whether it's the art department, the makeup department, all those, as well as wrangling the actors and making sure they have what they need. But he should be dealing with the heads of all those departments before every shot. So if an actor is in it, he needs to talk to every actor who's in the shot. If he has a production assistant that's handling extras for a shot, for instance, he needs to go to that production assistant and say, hey, where do we stand? Can I see them? Hey, that guy with the hat, make him lose the hat. Whatever aesthetic choice he makes. But that's what a director really does. We think of a director as someone who's behind the camera. He's not. He's in charge of, he's the manager of the guy who's behind the camera, which is the director of photography, who is the head of his department. And yes, a director of photography may or may not actually work a camera himself. He may never touch a camera. It's not part of the job description. His job description as a director of photography is to deliver a film that has been shot in a way that best conveys the story. If he hires 7 cameramen and decides to never touch a camera, and he has the budget to do so, then he's done his job. If he decides to shoot the entire film himself behind a single camera and he gets that done, he's done his job. So a director is in charge of every department. And it isn't probably what most people think of film production. You think of it as this high art, and really it's more like managing a Walmart. So in my analogy, which I always use, a director is the store manager. And he goes to the seafood department manager at the seafood department and says, how are sales today? Hey, when is the weekly audit coming? Right? And he goes through the whole store and he talks to all of his department managers. He doesn't talk to every associate necessarily. Maybe sometimes he does, but mostly talks to his department managers. The producer would be the district manager, right? He's the guy who, if the manager fails, has to right the ship. But he's also the guy controlling all the finances for the company. So he's the guy who's hiring the managers. He's the guy who's overseeing the production. If he walks in and sees that the director is not getting a job done, he may hire another assistant director to come in and take maybe a couple departments out of the director's hands. But he's ultimately responsible for the production, and he's the guy who's controlling the production budget, the production schedule. He's making sure things like transportation is available for the talent. Now, he may hire someone to do that job, and that's why you see transportation sometimes listed in credits of movies, right? If you ever wonder what that guy does, transportation, he's the guy who figures out how do we getting actor B from Hotel C to the shooting location. And he might be doing that for 85 people, or he might be doing them for none. Sometimes those guys will arrange certain ways that, hey, we can shoot this guy, I'll partner with the producer and we can manage to get all this guy's scenes out in 2 locations. So there might be very little travel to arrange. So everyone in a film production has their job, and they all have their bosses. Now, I won't continue to go down this road because that's way more than you guys asked, but you see a credit called executive producer. A lot of people think that's a title that's just given to people for name value, and it almost can be that thing, but an executive producer is specifically someone who is meant as a liaison between the distributor and the producer, which is really the production house. So that person is the person who usually facilitates the deal between the distributor and the people actually making the film. So when people say, oh, that movie has Wes Craven's name on it, but they just threw his name on and gave him the executive producer. No, probably what happened is Wes Craven found a director with a project that he really wanted to do, and he match made it with a distributor. Once you have a distributor lined up, you can get investment. You can't get investment until you have a distributor, because who's going to give money for a film to be made that might never sell and may never see the light of day? But if you have Universal saying we're going to release it, suddenly it's a lot better deal to, invest in a movie. Anyway, enough. Jess Graham says, also depends on what type of producer. Yep. I think I didn't read your comment until right now, but yeah, I mean, we could go through the whole litany, but I think you get it. You probably know better than I, actually. Crystal Lake Counselor 77 says that opening shot of Michael of Halloween is Michael coming from behind a tree, approaching his home. How do you interpret that? Well, I've said this before, but in my head, I have this scene which I would love to film, and it's of Michael Myers, the way I would open Halloween in my remake, as opposed to what Rob Zombie did. I would open it with the first shot being Michael Myers and Judith arguing. She's been told that she has to take him trick-or-treating by the parents when they went out. He wants to go trick-or-treating. He has his costume on. He's ready to go. She has her boyfriend coming over. She doesn't want to go. She tells him he can't go alone. He sneaks out of the house anyway. Michael Myers walks the street, does a little bit of trick-or-treating, sees other kids, but doesn't join their group. Maybe he's a little bit of an outcast. Not huge, but a little bit of an outcast. he's walking the streets and suddenly he turns, he hears something maybe, but we don't hear anything on the soundtrack. We get shots of the atmosphere of the town, wind in the trees, maybe, I don't want to get all David Lynch in a stoplight, but just maybe establishing shots of the town, and the music starts kicking up. Not necessarily the music, but music starts kicking up. And Michael Myers drops his bag of Halloween candy he's collected up to that point. In his face, he just, all emotion just leaves his face. And then Michael Myers walks home. And I think that's where the story, picks up. To me, that would convey everything we need to know about Michael Myers. Absolutely everything. It would also give us all the mood and atmosphere that we so richly deserve from the series, as opposed to what too often we have gotten. And that's how I would approach kind of any of these franchises, to be honest with you. I would build myth not by explaining, but by showcasing the uncanny. And at some point, I'll do a video about why I think the uncanny is so important and why the uncanny is something we've forgotten about. Jacob McCullough asks, what do you think of Brian Keene? I listened to his podcast, but I must confess I've read very little of his stuff. Of his work I've checked out, Dark Hollow is my favorite. So, full confession, Brian's a friend. So take that as what you will. I don't know how much you know, but I know him directly through Mary, who I guess Mary San Giovanni, who I had on my show. And obviously we've known each other for years. The two of them are, I don't want to put words in their mouth, but it's some form of girlfriend, boyfriend, and have been for years. I've had dinner with Brian. We've done conventions together. I think he's an amazing person who's always fighting, and I do mean fighting for the littler guy. So understand that I would never say a bad thing about Brian. What do I think of his writing? I think that there's works like Ghoul, which I think are extremely fun and worth much more than I paid for them. Have I liked everything? I haven't loved everything. No, I think there's certain worms. His novel about the giant earthworms always felt kind of disjointed to me. So, I mean, I wouldn't say that I love everything he's done. I think he's a powerhouse at what he does, which is kind of telling working man horror stories, kind of blue collar horror stories, what I'd say. And I think he's really good at that. Don't be surprised if, Brian's one of those guys that, don't be surprised if we hear from Brian. He's a good guy. Jess says, got to step away and play Candyman Land with my son. Lol, pop in if you're still on. Well, we're probably going to call this a day in a little bit. So, sir, enjoy your game of Candyland. I was always more of a Chutes and Ladders guy. Candyland was a little bit too Willy Wonka for my taste. Lost Cunningham says, I just finished Island by Keene and enjoyed it. Also love his podcast. The podcast is very, very good. Terminal is the best Keene novel. I didn't answer that before. Terminal is awesome stuff. And a lot of that has to do with he was working with a different publisher for that one. And I think editors are important. The style of one editor versus another editor will inform the work greatly. And I really wish that Brian had worked more with that team, because I love Terminal. He knows that. He's probably tired of me saying, but Terminal is always going to be my favorite, I think, unless I shouldn't say that. He could easily produce something that trumps it. But at this point, Terminal has been my favorite of his novels for a long, long time. Crystal Lake Counselor 77 says, Lauren, I found the novel I Know What You Did Last Summer as a child to be extremely bleak. Could a film adaptation of the original story work? I've never read it. I'll tell you something, any adaptation can work. And I'd love to see a lot more adaptations happen, because we have 65 years of modern horror fiction waiting to be adapted. And then we have another 120 years predating that the right artist could do something awesome with. I would like to see a lot more of these work adapted. I think that's where life gets good, is when we actually start adapting work that's already been conceptually finished, as opposed to these things that have to be found in the editing bay. Alaska Name says, sorry, Jacob, I just read Castaways by Keane. Got it confused with Layman's Island. So, and I think I did too. With that comment, because Castaways is definitely the novel I was thinking about now that I'm thinking about it. So, I mean, like, here's my thing. It's like people like Keane or Richard Layman, these are all people that have done important work in the genre. And I don't think enough of their work has been adapted. It'd be because unfortunately we live in a world where the amount of readers is never going to be substantial versus the amount of film watchers. Just how it is. I mean, listen, books still have a lot of influence, and they're still vital and important. But we're fooling ourselves if we're even using the word mass media to describe them. They're not. They are a niche market at this point, and I'm proudly a part of that niche. And it sounds like a number of you guys are too. And I'm glad you're the guys who will show up to watch my videos because you're my people. But I think there's just this treasure trove of material to be adapted, and we would have great horror films coming out all the time if good adaptations of existing novels was the norm, rather than a lot of screenplays that seem half-baked that get made. That's how it is. Jacob says, when you say you like dark humor, what kind of dark humor are we talking? Because for my money, films like Lighthouse, Faults, May, and Killer Joe are all particularly dark comedies. I think that Lighthouse is not quite a dark comedy to me. I think there's some darkly comedic stuff in it, but I think there's a whole lot going on in that movie. Check out my video on decoding it. I like comedy that doesn't make you laugh out loud. I like things that make me uncomfortable, and I get an uncomfortable comedic reaction because it makes me wonder what comedy really is, what humor really is. On some level, comedy is based on the idea of familiarity. If I feel the same way you feel about something and it's a positive emotion, we laugh. But if I feel the same way as you do about something that's threatening, that's a dark emotion, then that's kind of what the horror thing is. So being able to connect on some level through our shared experiences is what should make comedy and horror both work. So my problem with comedy is the goofy stuff I cannot relate to. My life has never been that. Like the Jim Carrey stuff, and I pick on Jim Carrey all the time. I should really find other examples, but man, I can't relate to that. It's just so obnoxious to me, and it's not a part of my world. And since I don't connect with it, I can never find it funny. I just cannot. Now, other people can. I'm not saying that there's right or wrong, but I know what works for me. James Frost says, much respect to Mary for mentioning Silent Hill games. Lauren, have you ever tried to play Silent Hill games? No. I don't play video games, guys. I don't see that changing. Every time I do one of these streams, either in the comments or in the comments later, or I get a private message on Twitter, someone suggests that I should try this game or that game. It's just a matter. I'm not going to buy a game system and buy a game, sit down and kind of try and program myself into this entire art form that I'm not keyed into. Believe me, I have enough movies and books and audio dramas and all kinds of other stuff, as well as writing my own stuff. I have enough on my plate without going to video games. I just worry that I would eat even more time than I waste on other things. Chris Light Counselor 77 says Black Christmas and Texas Chainsaw Massacre were released within a week of each other in 74. Will we ever see two classics released in the same year again? Maybe. But I'll tell you, you'll have a lot better chance if you open yourself up outside the borders. America is in this death spiral, not just in horror, but that's obviously our common language. We don't innovate anymore. We're not the people leading the charge. And that's a problem. We're not, how to put this best? So when I go to a film, I want to see something I've never seen before. I want to feel something I can't feel in my life, but I want to relate to it, right? So show me a story that I couldn't possibly have in my life, but have it triggered into something that's relevant in my life. That's how horror works. That's how comedy works. That's what we've just been discussing. But America doesn't seem to get that. So there was a movie that came out either late last year or this year, and I'm forgetting the title. It's about a bunch of girls who wake up and there's this like a psycho slasher killer following around, but the rules are that, like, if they have to be protected by that killer, and if they die, that killer dies as well. And this great concept, right? But the problem is that I don't feel anything while watching it because I can't relate to that concept. Anyway, there's no metaphor to something in my life, so it doesn't work. It was gory, it was nasty, it was fast paced, it was well acted. There's a lot of good reasons to see it, but it didn't particularly work, and it's something I'm glad I watched. I'll never watch it again. If someone remembers the title of that film, just scream it out, please. Jacob says, I haven't read Castaways. We'll keep it in mind. Chris like Counselor 77, Lauren, what ultimately is responsible for a particular film being judged as good or bad? I personally like Stallone's Get Carter. It's not well liked. Who decides? You decide. It's your world. I mean that. I mean, I give my opinion all the time, and I hope you guys understand it's just my opinion. It's ridiculous how people try and codify good or bad. Now, I think you can talk about attributes of a film in hard terms. I think we all know what bad acting looks like, right? But does that necessarily have to sink a film? No. If you enjoy a film that has bad acting, then it's still to you a good film. Everyone's going to be different, and because everyone's life is different. If you have a crappy day at work, you might come home and put on an old ghost movie, and maybe it makes your life really better. Now, you're going to feel strongly about the movie. You might have a conversation the next day with your friend who likes horror films. They go, that thing? Oh, that was the most boring bull crap I've ever seen. But you know what? It helped you through your day. Are you wrong? And maybe he can point out all the problems of the movie, the way I point out the problems with Aliens. Understand, I don't want anyone who loves Aliens to hate it tomorrow. I just would like us to have a discussion about what works and doesn't work for each of us. And, if you have a controversial opinion, then you're going to have to describe kind of explicitly what doesn't work. It's just how it works when we talk about anything in life. But no, I think, listen, Crystal Lake Counselor, if you love something that everyone you know hates, that just makes it more yours. That's all it does. I have plenty of films that, people look at me and go, why do you champion that? And it's like, because I love it. And I'm not talking so much about something like Game Over, which I think anyone would get enjoyment of, but like Dead Scared right there. I get people ask, should I pick that up? It's expensive. Well, I wouldn't be disappointed with that purchase, but you might be. I can only talk from my point of view. So there is no hard, fast, good or bad. Those words are kind of meaningless anyway. We're not talking about, good and evil here. We're talking about something as subjective as whether you like a flick. James Frost says, very understandable. I've myself have been losing my passion and interest for video games. I started getting back into reading a lot more in the last few years. Well, I think that's always my standby too. When I get too frustrated with everything else going on, it's back to the horror novels, like every time. It also helps because I have a lot of friends who, are writers, and I always have a friend who's releasing something. So it's like, it's easy for me to always have something that I'm kind of excited about because this person or that person is releasing something. And I think that's always going to be a great place for me. Now, the horror fan that doesn't read, I don't berate those people. Do I think they're missing out? Sure I do. But if they're comfortable missing out, then who the hell am I to say? You know, I'm sure I'm missing out on video games that are awesome, but in my life, in everyone's life, you have to make decisions about how you're going to spend your time. We only have so many rotations on the planet. At the end of my life, maybe I made the wrong choices, but they're still going to be my choices, so I'm still going to stand on that hill and die on that hill. Better chance of returning to their prize role, Robert Englund or Kane Hodder? Um, I think Robert Englund has a chance, one last chance. That window is definitely only half open, and in a couple of years will probably close entirely. Kane Hodder will probably return to the role, not in a feature film, but he will probably return to it in some form. He returned for the video game. I could see him doing that kind of thing. I could see him being utilized um, in some way representing the character physically in the future. Will he ever be back as in a feature film? I'll tell you why I don't think that's the case. Hollywood has gotten very risk averse about having to license likenesses to people whose faces are not on camera. And that's what happened to Kane Hodder ultimately. The real reason he was added Freddy vs. Jason was just because he wanted his piece of the merchandising. That's all it is. Okay. Jacob says there are similarities, but those similarities are rather shallow. Sorry, I lost the thread there. Rush's Ashes says, Lauren, you have become that person for us, I think. The guy we can trust to deal with the analog world. I'm with you, bro. Well, thank you, man. And that's probably about where I should leave it. My goals are not to, stroke my ego. I didn't want to do live at first for exactly this reason. The idea of me putting myself out there like this is not really something I really expect from myself. And I think I've gotten a little more at ease doing it. I'm better in conversations with other people, but even that, the idea of doing a controlled video, whereas I can take as many cuts and as many takes, I can have fun making an intro. That stuff is like easier for me because it gets the creative spirit in the right way. But I realize that on some level, there's a desire for there to be, someplace to turn to talk about horror. And it doesn't necessarily exist in even the new media world of, websites and social media. I think we need to take matters into our own hands, and that's what I'm trying to do here. That's what I'm, trying to work with some peers on, so that when the former sausage factory reappears, we have something that really can be a meeting place, and can be a triumphant thing of the fans taking back ownership of the genre away from these pointless websites and these social media like echo chambers, someplace that values the individual opinion more than anything else, and that will champion that one little film that no one else likes, or will take on that giant film that everyone claims to like, but we're all really talking out of our asses about. I think that we won't be without controversy, but I think it'll be a good form of controversy, not a bad form, if that makes any sense. I'll just read a couple more comments, and then I'm probably going to end the stream because I have been going for 2 hours. Jacob says, I think Jeffrey Combs and Tony Todd are the real genre powerhouses who I'd like to see get the spotlight more. I'm glad Barbara Crampton has been doing good stuff. I like both those guys. You see, I don't think that we're ever going to have a class of horror thespians like the Karloff Lugosi, Atwill, Carradine class, or the Price Lee, Cushing class. I think that time period, those time periods, are really kind of well in the rearview mirror now, because it seems like our modern horror actors, the guys who were synonymous with the genre, they do a couple of films that come out theatrically, make them very big, and maybe they have their franchise, but they do a lot of direct to streaming now would be the correct term, crap, to stay relevant to the genre. And it's a weird sort of process, whereas They're asked to do things below their level, things that we would never have asked Vincent Price or Christopher Lee to do. So I think things have changed. I'd love it to go back the other way. That would be awesome, but I'm not sure it will. We should just, we should really show these guys that are still working that we love them and we love what they do, because I think it has to be kind of lonely in a way out there, thinking that you're always going back to your high school football days almost. Hey, I was in Child's Play 30 years ago. All right. Crystal Lake Counselor says, Lauren, why haven't we seen a book and feature documentary for the Halloween saga like we have Crystal Lake Memories and Never Sleep Again? I don't know. All I'd say about that is that there's a big audience for it. Someone eventually will figure it out. Might be a rights issue. Maybe the rights are in different places and the rights holders don't want to play ball. I don't know. Dave Vanderhoff, hey, how are you, man? I didn't say hello to you. I just got Hide and Go Shriek in the mail today, and I ordered it 2 months ago from Amazon UK. Have you seen it? I have to watch it tonight for the first time. I have seen it. It's a lesser entry, but you'll enjoy it. I just don't like the pricing on these titles. I'll be honest. I don't think what we typically are being asked to pay for B movies from 30, 40 years ago is justifiable. Maybe I'm cheap. Maybe it's because of the way I grew up and how money was when I was growing up. But I just don't see a reason why we can't have a budget line for this stuff that still look and sound great. $15 for a movie that's a guilty pleasure makes a lot of sense to me. And don't start with the whole nothing's a guilty pleasure thing. There are things that are guilty pleasures. It's okay. Chris Lake Counselor 77 says, it looks like Halloween Kills will be postponed until 2021. If Candyman comes out and is huge, they might stick the landing on Halloween. Otherwise, I think you're right. Crystal Lake Counselor 77 says, would Dee Wallace make a good Pamela Voorhees? Yeah, but my money has always been on my choices. You get Amy Steele to do the role. It makes that scene at the end of part 2 make all that much more sense, in that she's supposed to resemble Pamela Voorhees. If you have her play Pamela Voorhees, 30 years later, I think there's a kind of neat symmetry there. Jacob says, people are too quick to write off things as unoriginal based on vague similarities. I could rag on Kathy Kojic because of the similarities between it and King's Boogeyman. However, that'd be simplistic. Yeah, of course. But you know what? The point where we're getting stuff that's that original, I stop having any arguments about creativity having run out. By the way, there is no lack of news stories. They're just not being made into films. Jacob also says, they dismiss something like Midsummer by comparing it to Wicker Man. Yeah, I mean, there's similarities, undeniably, but if you can't see the value of Midsummer independent of Wicker Man, I don't know that you really watched the movie. You probably spent too much time on your phone while the movie was playing. Vanderhoff says, I bought a Friday the 13th Part 4 NECA figure back in October, and I just realized that it's a knockoff. I'm pissed. Sorry about that, dude. I don't buy much molded plastic. I did buy a Mothman this week, though. Because even though I don't believe in the Mothman, I love him. West Virginia represent. I don't know why. I don't have anything to do with West Virginia. Chris Lake Council 77. Lauren, why was Spring Break changed to the Mutilator? Probably because there was a sex comedy called Spring Break, directed by Sean Cunningham. All right. Russia says, Amy Steele, that would be fantastic. I agree. Hey, guys, I'm going to leave it at that. I need to call it a night, but I want to thank everyone for coming on board here and dealing with me prattling on about all the stuff that you came. Also, keep an eye on the Blu-ray situation with Samsung. I think it is a real story and a real concern. We constantly talk about whether physical media is here for the long haul. This is a good canary in the coal mine, I feel, because if Samsung don't put something in place to support the hardware, then inevitably a whole lot of people will have paperweights instead of players. And will they replace those players, or will they just go completely streaming, which would obviously facilitate the move towards physical media dying even faster? I don't know. We need to watch, and we need to continue to support physical media wherever we can. They're not making it easy, though, are they? All right, guys. I want to say have a great night. Be good. Have a good weekend. On Monday, actually, one last thing before you go. On Monday, I will be back at 8 o'clock with...
They're just going back and hating on it.
Yeah, I'll be joined by Monty on Monday at 8 p.m. Eastern Time. It should be a fun night. I love Monty. He's just an amazing person, and he has a lot to share. So stop on by, and we'll check you out then. Have a great night.